Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Steven here with TB Fork, and this is day 9 of the 80 Days to Your Dream Body course. Today's protein source is going to be elk ribeye steak, and today is going to be a shoulders and arms training workout. And the theme for today's video is exercise frequency. So today, I'm going to be explaining how many days per week you should be training based off of various factors. Now let's get started. And while we're resting, I want to talk a little bit more about the types of exercises that you're performing. I already touched on this a little bit earlier, but I want to get back into it because this is going to be very, very important. With regard to the exercises, compound exercises, those are going to recruit multiple muscles, and they're going to have a lot more larger muscles that are going to be involved. So they are going to require more recovery, whereas isolation exercises are going to target very specific muscles. They're smaller muscles, often single joint muscles, and well, often it is a single joint because it's an isolation, so it can't be multi-joint muscle. But those muscles over there, they can be done more frequently. Things like your squats, your deadlifts, your bench presses, your pull-ups, those are going to be very, very high with regard to your energy demands. And because the energy demand is so high, you're going to need more recovery. Whereas if you're doing biceps curls, tricep extensions, calf raises, those are very, very small muscles that you're going to be training. And because they're very, very small muscles, you'll be able to train them a lot more times per week. You could train them 3 to 4 times per week. And what you would want to do ideally, especially if your goal is something like hypertrophy, is you would want to balance your compound and isolation movements together to get the maximum training stimulus. With regard to the compound and isolation, if you are doing any type of pushing day, let's say you're splitting your workouts where you're doing a push-pull legs. On your push day, that's when you would do your elbow extension work because there's a lot of carryover between pushing and elbow extension. On your pulling day, that's when you would do your elbow flexion work. So pushing, that's when you do your triceps. Pulling, that's when you do your biceps. And then on the days that you are doing legs, obviously that's the day that you would throw in your calves. With regard to calf training, because the calves don't really get worked on or are constantly being worked on because you're always on your feet, they're going to be able to recover very, very fast. And things like the soleus muscle, it's a tonic muscle, which means it's a postural muscle. If you're going to be training your soleus, that it's really hard to overtrain the soleus. So something like your soleus training, you can do that very, very often. Where something like your gastrocnemius, that is more of a phasic muscle. It's a fast twitch muscle. So if you're going to be doing calf raises, something like seated calf raises, you could do those more often than something like standing calf raises, because with the standing calf raises, you're going to be emphasizing the gastrocnemius, which is a more phasic muscle. It's a fast twitch muscle. So it responds better to more strength, speed, and power, and it's going to require higher recovery. Whereas something like the soleus, which is doing something like a seated calf raise, that is a much smaller muscle. It is a tonic muscle. It's a postural muscle. It responds better to endurance. But rest is up. Time for set number 4. And while we are resting, let's talk about the relationship between your training frequency and your periodization strategy. There are a few different types of periodization. There's linear periodization, undulating periodization, block periodization. With regard to linear periodization, this is when you are gradually increasing the intensity over time. So your intensity goes up and your repetitions goes down. With regard to linear periodization, this one, as you start out, when you're starting out, the intensity is going to be very, very low, so you won't need as much recovery. Toward the end of a linear periodization, when your intensity is very high, you're going to need a little bit more recovery. With undulating periodization, this is where you vary the intensity and volume throughout the week. So you have a period of accumulation where it's high volume, low intensity, and then you have an intensification period where you switch to high intensity and low volume. So on the days where you are doing things like an accumulation phase, because you're doing higher volume and lower intensity, on those days, on those training sessions, you're going to be able to recover a lot quicker, so you can incorporate more training sessions. On your intensification phases, that is when the intensity is going to be really high, so you're going to have to taper it down a little bit. And speaking of tapering, athletes, if you're trying to peak for an event, you are going to want to make sure that you are tapering according to the intensity that you're doing. With regard to athletes, this also brings us to the topic of block periodization. With regard to block periodization, you would incorporate different training blocks depending on what exactly your goal is. I mentioned the biomotor abilities earlier. Again, we have 8 of them. We have speed, strength, power, endurance, flexibility, agility, coordination, and balance. So with block periodization, you would focus particular blocks on whatever strength or whatever biomotor ability you are trying to enhance. If you are focusing on things like speed, strength, and power, those are all going to be very, very high intensity biomotor abilities. So focusing on speed, strength, and power, you are going to have a little bit less training frequency as opposed to focusing on something like endurance, agility, coordination, balance, flexibility. If you're doing all of those things, those are generally going to be low intensity and a lot of them are going to be low impact. So when you are focusing on those biomotor abilities, you're going to be able to train a lot more frequently. The periodization, though, it's going to be very, very important, and it should be adjusted based off of athletes and what type of sport they're competing in, and also their competitive schedule. So depending on what the sport is, some sports, they have a very consistent schedule and they know their schedule a year in advance. Other sports like MMA and boxing, I coach a lot of MMA fighters and boxers. Their training schedules are all over the place, and it is a nightmare to try and periodize a program for those particular athletes. But rest is up, time for set number 5. And while we are resting, let's talk about overtraining and auto-regulation and how that's going to impact your training frequency. Overtraining, this is going to lead to fatigue, poor performance, and it's going to have a greater injury risk. So you would want to make sure that you avoid overtraining. And one of the things that you could do to avoid overtraining is something called auto-regulation. Auto-regulation, this is going to help you adjust training based on how you feel each day. I mentioned earlier on in the video where the way that I like to do it with my athletes is I will figure out what exactly their resting heart rate is, and then every morning I make them measure their resting heart rate. If it is elevated by 5%, that day we decrease the volume. If it's increased by 10% from what their normal is, on that day we will do an active recovery day and we will avoid hard training altogether. But you want to be able to listen to your body and prevent overuse injuries that way. If you end up doing the heart rate method, absolutely terrific. There are also some other recovery methods that I've done on my channel. If you just search recovery or how often should you train, they will be found in there. But auto-regulation, it is great, and it helps you to adapt your workout intensity and volume to your actual recovery ability. The other thing I mentioned earlier with regard to deloads, deload weeks, they can help prevent overtraining by reducing the volume and intensity. And with regard to deload weeks, again, you could pre-plan them or you could just play it by ear and find that if you are a little bit more tired on that day, that particular day could be a deload day. For me, myself, again, I do not plan deload weeks into my training ahead of time. If I find that I'm overtraining and I just need a little bit of a break, I will do a deload on that particular day. But generally, it's not something that I pre-plan. And with regard to deloads, this is going to help prevent overtraining and it'll reduce symptoms like chronic fatigue, irritability, decreased motivation. If you are feeling good, you're going to be more motivated to train. And if you're more motivated to train, you're going to have better workouts. Another thing with regard to auto-regulation is you want to be able to track your recovery. You could use tools like your heart rate variability, what I mentioned earlier with regard to just tracking your heart rate and seeing if there is an increase in your average heart rate. But if you are overtraining, it can be avoided with proper rest and nutrition. So you want to make sure that you're getting enough sleep, you're drinking enough water, you are eating the proper food, so you're getting enough protein in your diet so that you can repair and rebuild your muscles. And you want to be able to reduce the training frequency when needed during stressful periods of your life so that you can prevent burnout. But overall, auto-regulation, it is going to ensure long-term progress by optimizing your workout intensity. And that is it. Time for the 6th and final set. Thanks for sticking around until the end of the video. Be sure to like, share, and leave a comment as it'll help the algorithm. And if you enjoyed the content, show your support by subscribing to the channel by clicking on the icon in the bottom right corner. And if you really want to show your support, then consider becoming a member by clicking on the icon in the bottom left corner. These new high-quality videos aren't cheap to edit, and the $5 membership will really help with the video editing budget. You'll also get access to a ton of exclusive perks like early access to videos and this program design lecture playlist in the top right-hand corner. And if you want to learn how to do a one-armed pull-up, then check out the playlist on the top left corner.